Today, we're in a golden age of what it really means to read Star Wars. How do you want to consume your stories? Movies? Well, we definitely got you covered there. Books? There are an entire company built around the Star Wars publishing world. Manga? We have that too. Live action TV shows? Yep. Animated shows? Dope. Adorable little shorts made by the guys who brought you Howl's Moving Castle and Totoro? A little specific, but yeah, we got that. Comics? You want to read comics? Wow, well then boy do I have some good news for you. There is a comic adaptation of every single Star Wars movie. Except for Rise of Skywalker. Sorry guys, COVID happened and it has done a number on the comics industry. Now, you've definitely heard us talk about the importance of the novel adaptations for Star Wars movies. We talk about them constantly. I'm even working on a Sacred Texts video about the Revenge of the Sith novelization by Matthew Stover right now. But anyway, I'm making this video to tell you about the Star Wars movies comics adaptations, how you can get into them, what I think of them, and what it's like to read them over the course of a 12-hour span. Red Bull. Roll the intro. Hey guys, it's Parker, and I'm here to tell you about the comic adaptations of your favorite movies of all time. We're going to be tackling these in 3 parts: Prequel Trilogy, Original Trilogy, Sequel Trilogy. First, let me get this out of the way because I know that a lot of you are going to be asking the question. I'll tell you that you can read these all with the Marvel Unlimited app. We're not sponsored or anything, but it is $10 a month, plus there's a free trial that you can use, forget to cancel, and then pay for the rest of your life. But all of the comics that I'm talking about now are on there. I also went to my local library. I was able to find 2 of these 3 adaptations just sitting on the shelf, and neither of them have been checked out since like 2015. So I have a feeling that if you go looking for them, you could probably find them. So now that you've figured out how you're gonna read them, let's talk about the comics themselves. 8 of the 9 mainline Star Wars episodes have been made into trade paperbacks. What's a trade paperback? Many comics, 1 book. Without getting too deep into the details of how comics are compiled and published, basically every one of these episodes was released as several different comics issues, and then eventually they got compiled into 1 trade paperback per episode. Sometimes a trade paperback isn't necessarily a paperback. I found the hardcover copies of the ones that I read. Those trades that you obtain will actually contain all of the issues that cover the episode that you're reading. Make sense? Hope so, moving on. But real quick, before I move on to Phantom Menace, I just want you to know that this video is brought to you
by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
No, but seriously, all of you guys watching that are a member of our Patreon, you're what makes it possible for us to make these videos and do live shows every week. Go to patreon.com/utini for access to that. It contains an entire network of podcasts, author interviews, and full movie commentaries by the hosts of The Living Force. Okay, so the first Star Wars movie is obviously The Phantom Menace. Chronologically, put the keyboard down. It's chronologically first. I know how time works. Anyway, let's talk about Phantom Menace. I want to make it abundantly clear, I like this adaptation. It's not very common, especially in today's landscape, that you see a film that gets adapted into print. Typically, it's the other way around. The Phantom Menace adaptation does a really good job of telling the story that the movie tells, but with less resources than the film has. What do I mean by resources? I mean that when Natalie Portman delivers the line,
"We are brave, Your Highness,"
we can feel the determination in her voice. Even through the stoic mask that the handmaidens of Naboo have been trained to maintain, we can feel her urging Sabe to take the Jedi's offer of an escort off-world. We get the tangible feel from her voice that this is a tough decision. And herein lies one of the major gripes that I have with the Phantom Menace adaptation. The facial expressions are a bit not awesome. This is the panel we get in the comic to show this scene. This feels like the wrong emotion to me. Padme seems almost smug. It just kind of misses the mark for me. And that's not to say this is the case for every single panel. The artist is really good, and we see that in the next panel. Look at Sabe's face here. She is relentless, determined, strong. She will plead her case before the Senate. It's just that for a lot of the panels in this adaptation, I'm not getting the emotion that I originally got from it while watching the film. And maybe that's the beauty of it. Maybe that's the thing I'm missing. The ability to provide a new outlook on a scene using only the power of an artist and a writer is completely different from the challenges that a filmmaker faces while writing a movie. But I have a theory about this adaptation that I think leads to this slight disconnect of emotion. The stoic and poised Qui-Gon Jinn and the emotionally trained Naboo ruling class are not the best subjects for a comic that's attempting a scene-by-scene recreation in comic form. Because let it be known that this is what's being attempted. The adaptation is basically panel for scene, a direct port from the screen to the page. The artist and writer don't have the benefit of the actor's tone of voice or the subtleties in their face and eyes to portray emotion, which is something that this movie relies on constantly. The actors in this movie are good. We're talking about Natalie Portman, Liam Neeson, Ewan McGregor. These folks have the acting chops to portray their emotions through their character stoicism. But comic books are historically not the best medium for stoic characters to get their emotions across. We have to rely on comics doing what a lot of comics typically do, which is portraying over-the-top emotion. That's why when you read comics, there's a bolded word in like every speech bubble. That's why characters' faces in comics are often so extreme and animated. If the character is a bit perturbed, you're probably gonna see straight up fear on that character's face in frame. Ironically, one of the best examples of this is seen directly in the same adaptation we're talking about. That's why I keep saying that it's not consistent. The artist is really good, but because they're portraying these scenes at often the same angle that the film gives us, you just can't draw facial expressions that defined from the distances that these panels are drawn from. But anyway, that example of emotion, it's Jar Jar Binks. Maybe it's so confusing to me because they do such a good job of portraying his emotions right here in this cattle prod scene. He's wearing his emotions on his sleeve in the best possible way for a comic adaptation. In the movie, he just kind of yelps, but it's hard to just kind of yelp in a comic. So instead, the artist draws a much more eccentric emotion. Look at his face here. This is way more over the top than actually happens in the movie. But that's fine because message received, sir. Look at the emotion on his face. You understand what's happening here. Granted, his speech is a little hard to read, but I do not envy the writer. He's having to parse Gunganese gibberish into consumable English for those of us who are reading it. He does a really good job. But seriously, look at this cattle prod panel and then compare it to this. This is when Anakin's tied up with Sebulba at the pod race. He's going about a bazillion miles an hour, like 2 feet from the ground, locked up with a guy who definitely wants him dead and would definitely kill him to save his own skin. See what I mean? Some of the faces in some of the panels could use just a little more emotion. And honestly, if you do a little research, you can see that this isn't a problem that only Star Wars has to solve. If you read any Spider-Man comics, then you know about the iconic half-mask Spider-Man portrayal when he's using his Spidey sense. This started all the way back in the 1960s when Steve Ditko and Stan Lee couldn't figure out how to tell audiences what Peter was feeling when he had his mask on. His spider sense is often bailing him out of a close call. He's typically pretty scared or intrigued whenever it's going off, but it's so hard to show that under Spider-Man's mask. So they talked about it for a while, went home and slept on it that night. That night at home, Ditko had an idea. He drew up a few sketches and brought it to Stan Lee the next day. He showed Stan Lee the concept of splitting Peter's face whenever he's wearing the Spider-Man mask and he's being affected by Spidey sense. Stan Lee loved it, they went with it, and they printed it. That's a decision that has stuck with Spider-Man comics to this day. Conveying emotion through facial expression is huge for comics. So Ditko spent the night trying to figure out how to do that for his readers because he knew how important it was. He came up with the half mask so we could tell that he was in his Spider-Man suit. We could tell that the scene hadn't changed from panel to panel. But we also can see Peter Parker's face and see how angry, scared, or surprised he was in that actual panel. That seems to be the main issue with this adaptation. It's the mask of stoicism that the characters are so often wearing. Now, I know this problem can be solved, and I know that because this isn't the only adaptation for this movie. Some of the Star Wars movies have manga adaptations as well, and this is one of them. 160 pages of pure manga awesomeness. It's really overt in its attempts to get you to feel more emotion than the characters on screen actually portray. Check out the scene where Qui-Gon dies in the manga versus the same scene in the comic. In the comic, you see Obi-Wan's emotions for sure, but Darth Maul kind of looks like he's weed whacking or something. Definitely not slaying a Jedi in heated combat. In the manga, you see intention, you see hatred, you see anger. You also see one more very important thing. Qui-Gon's face. He just got stabbed by a Sith Lord that he didn't know existed until maybe a week or two before, and prior to that, thought that no Sith had existed for 2,000 years. And you see all of that written all over his face. And then on Obi-Wan's face, anguish, panic. Like I said, Obi-Wan's face is fine in the comic. It's just that the manga nails it so well. I'm not here to dump all over this adaptation. Please, if that's what this sounds like, it's not what it is. I genuinely really like it, and it does a ton well. Like, the combat scenes and the set piece style 2-page panels are awesome. The art is spectacular, and during action scenes, the use of those huge, bold onomatopoeia words is really well done and not really intrusive. This adaptation does a really good job of letting you see the action in a more zoomed out view than typically we see in comics. Love the action scenes here. It's a huge strength of the piece as a whole. Also, one other little interesting factoid is that the Yoda you see here is pre-CGI Yoda, and it's kind of cool to see that Puppet Yoda hasn't been lost to the sands of time. Overall, I loved the Phantom Menace adaptation. It was colorful, informative, and it was a really great way to consume this story, even if you've never seen the movie. Anyone who wants to read this, biggest Star Wars fan down to somebody who's never even seen the Phantom Menace, they could read this, get the story, and really enjoy it. Problems that I have with it are largely things that are really hard to deal with when you're doing a back adaptation from film to print. Your audience already has a much more intimate view of your subject matter than you can possibly provide on the pages of a comic book. So it's hard to absolutely nail it, but the writer and artist did an amazing job. Phantom Menace holds up. Read it, enjoy it, it's really good. Before we read our Attack of the Clones adaptation, I just want to let you know that I am going to link our Clones collection from Utini.com right below the like button. If you like the Clone Troopers, Clone Wars, or any of the stories having to do with them, check that collection out because all of the best books that are relating to Clone Troopers are right there for you to enjoy. Okay, so the Attack of the Clones adaptation takes on an entirely different tone than the Phantom Menace adaptation. The art's incredible. Facial expressions, character design, it's all amazing. There's even extra scenes in this one that aren't in the movie that give a lot more context as to what's actually going on in this world. You kind of get context that might have been missing in the film if you weren't paying attention. Check out this scene where Padme gives Anakin the eyes after they hadn't seen each other for 10 years. I mean, come on, that's just good art right there. Even the lettering does a good job of giving emphasis where it needs to be given. You can even see the reproach in Obi-Wan's voice as he and Anakin are chasing Zam through the skies of Coruscant. I love the way Obi-Wan is drawn in this comic, and I want him drawn in everything exactly like this for the rest of time. He looks awesome. You can see his tired dad eyes that he's developed over the last decade of dealing with Anakin, but he still looks young and energetic. And the way Jango Fett is drawn here is super satisfying. Whether or not he's a bad guy is not ambiguous here. He's a straight up scary dude. The artist here was able to capture the little things that make this feel like a Star Wars movie on a page. Look at the slight slump in Anakin's shoulders as he walks around Padme's apartment. Not to mention the fact that you can definitely tell that this is Padme's apartment because it's drawn so well, picking out the perfect little areas to put as a backdrop to tell you where they're standing. Little minor detail, but sometimes it's really not clear where somebody is in a comic. The artwork is absolutely masterful. Oh, and also pre-CGI Yoda. He's back. Now you may be wondering why that is, and I think I figured it out because I was wondering too. The comic adaptation run started only a month after Attack of the Clones came out. The movie was still in theaters. I know, imagine if we were getting comics that quickly now. When the comic was being drawn and written, I would imagine they were sent screenshots of key scenes that they would need to be portraying in the comic. By this point, the movie was probably in post. They may have even been given an early screening of the movie. Now, if you didn't know, Yoda was literally a tennis ball on a stick before they CGI'd him into all of his scenes, just to give something for the actors to actually focus on while they were speaking with and to Yoda. I would bet that whatever the artist and writer were given, as far as screenshots or set design, probably didn't have the new Yoda depicted in those scenes. And since that level of CGI was so cutting edge that they used to actually put Yoda into the movie, I would bet that it probably happened pretty late into post-production. The comic was probably already drawn, so I bet the artist went with basically what they were familiar with. Granted, that's not based on anything but an educated guess. There was just no way that the Yoda Dooku fight scene could have ever happened between Puppet Yoda and a real person. Unless they decided to do it like Muppet Treasure Island, but I mean, we decided not to go in that direction, and I can respect that decision. The Attack of the Clones adaptation holds up pretty darn well, and if that's something that interests you, I think you should definitely check it out. It may well be sitting at your library, not checked out since like the Stone Age. Okay, so finally we've gotten to the last of the prequel adaptations, Revenge of the Sith. Being that this is my favorite of all of the Star Wars movies, I was really excited to read this. When I first opened the book, I was treated to a completely different art style than I found in The Phantom Menace or Attack of the Clones. The style here is grainier and a little more retro than that of its predecessors. It's a little more realistic. I'm gonna be honest, at first I didn't love it. I thought that it was a little too much for a comic book. But then as I read, I realized I loved it. I absolutely loved it. And we'll get into why later. This adaptation gets straight to the point. It basically starts at the Buzz Droid scene at the beginning of the movie. So we get straight into the action, it wastes no time, and that's gonna be a theme that you're gonna see throughout. It takes advantage of actually some deleted scenes that, unless you've watched the behind the scenes or the making of documentary of Revenge of the Sith, you may not even know existed. Like that one scene where Obi-Wan and Anakin are climbing through the fuel tunnel, that's in this adaptation, but it never made it into the movie. The deleted scene is actually pretty finished as far as deleted scenes go in Star Wars, but it was cut from the movie for runtime and it made it into this comic adaptation, which is just really cool for me. Just another reason for you to grab this comic and give it a read. The art in this adaptation is worth the price of admission for me. It's really, really, really good. It provides so much emotion. It shows the desperation and anxiety that truly permeate the Revenge of the Sith story. Anakin is grim, determined. He does not want to lose Padme. You can see it in his scarred face. I do have one very important complaint about this adaptation. It removes the two best lines from this movie. There is no hello there, and there is no so uncivilized. You can't just take those out of this story. That's like half of Obi-Wan's character development in A New Hope. Elegant weapon, more civilized age. Yeah, well, that line makes no sense if all you read was the comic for Revenge of the... Okay, I'm just kidding. Honestly, it makes sense why they took it out, because the fight scene between Obi-Wan and General Grievous is really different in this adaptation than it was in the movie. It makes sense, though, why they would change this. The fight scene isn't necessarily the focal point of the movie anyway. Yes, it's awesome, and I look forward to it every time I watch it. But at the end of the day, General Grievous's purpose in that movie is kinda to send the Separatists to Mustafar, and to give Obi-Wan a reason to leave Anakin to his own devices for a while he hunts for him. The adaptation only has 4 comic issues, and one of them is completely dedicated to post-Order 66. There's a lot of ground to cover really quickly. No need to waste time on the almost hour of runtime that the movie spends watching people try to cut each other in half. The adaptation chooses to focus more on characters and the interaction between them, which is a choice that I do not mind, especially since, like I covered earlier, it's even bringing deleted scenes into the mix and changing established scenes to make them more drive the story. You really get to see what happens to these characters, less so what happens when nobody's talking and they're just trying to whack each other with glow sticks. Really good creative choice in my opinion. Alright, all in all, these adaptations are worth a read. After reading them all, I came to the realization that the most important part about these comics is not that they're just another Star Wars comic to read. They're an entirely new viewpoint on the movies. This is what it could have looked like had someone else directed these films. In a lot of cases, I really enjoy changes that the writer and artist choose to make to the pacing of the story. And the emotions that come from these adaptations are really rich. They provide a lot of insight into the mental state of these characters, basically as they're watching their galaxy tear itself apart. Definitely read these, they're worth your time. And if you're looking for more Star Wars content like this, subscribe to the channel. Especially if you want to see what I think of all of the rest of the movie comic adaptations, because I'm going to be covering all of them right here on the channel. So make sure that you're turning on the bell icon to find out when those videos go live. Thanks for sticking around for this long. If you made it this long, head over to our Discord server and at me. I'd love to continue the conversation in this video right there with you guys. The Discord server is linked right below the sub button. Also, make sure that you guys tune in to The Living Force every single Monday night. Happy New Year, guys. Thanks for watching. And as always, may the Force be with you.